working as a reporter for the Los Angeles Times and Pacifica Radio. Her work appears in many publications reconciling themes of diaspora, mysticism, addiction, classism, labor justice, queerness, and small towns. She lives with her family and dogs in Vancouver, where she holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of British Columbia. She is still recovering from the wayward youth and pathological idealism that inspires her work. So let's all welcome Paige. Paige, congratulations on the release of A Town with Half the Lights On. This is it's a great book. I read it twice. I loved it each time. So I want you to just start by telling us a little bit about what's going on. In this book, we're kind of following the Solving family and what's brought them back to Goodnight, Kansas.
Well, the Solvings have lost everything in Brooklyn. Can you hear me?
No.
No? Oh, is it on? It doesn't feel like it's on. Test.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, Sid Solving was a chef, and he ran his grandfather's business into the ground, and so they lost everything just as his wife inherits land in a small town called Goodnight, Kansas, and so they move into this small town, and they're just trying to find a way back to New York, but they end up getting sort of involved in the town, and they save the local diner that's falling apart and that's about to get closed. And it's just about how they become part of the community and how they change the community by being there and how they're changed by the community that they're in. And I'm trying not to put any spoilers out because it's hard to talk about it without spoilers.
It is, yeah. So we have Sid Solving, his wife Scarlett, who's originally from Goodnight, Kansas, and their daughter Harlem, who's 14.
Yes.
And then they meet another teenage girl named Disco. And Harlem and Disco are kind of outsiders.
They're both outsiders, yeah. And Disco Kennedy is, for those of you who knew me as a tween, it was pretty much me. I was like, I had just written another book before that was like very confessional, and I wanted to, I felt really exposed. So in this book, I was like, I gotta hide the fact that this is me. So I'm like, how can I hide that this is me? So I was like, I'll make her like country music, and then no one will ever know it's me. But then I started obsessively researching country. I'm obsessive about research, and so I started obsessively researching country music, and then I became completely obsessed with it. And but yeah, that's her thing. And she goes to the Mayday Diner to listen to country music because her mother's a religious zealot who won't let her listen to any country music at home. And so she's determined to save the Mayday, and she sort of lures the Solving family into buying the Mayday. And then Harlem is from New York, and so she just does not want to be in Goodnight, Kansas. And I grew up very much as a fish out of water, even though we moved here when I was 5 weeks old. And, but I just always felt like a fish out of water here. And so both of those characters sort of captured that.
So Disco, like she said, is on this mission to save the Mayday Diner, which is sort of the heart and soul of Goodnight, Kansas. And Disco, that's the only place she really feels comfortable. She can listen to her music. So did you pull from any real places that were kind of the Mayday for you?
There were a lot of different Mayday diners in my life, I think, because I got sober really young, and so diners became really, really important, and staying at diners really late at night, drinking a lot of coffee, and occasionally getting kicked out of diners. In fact, I think there's some people here who have gotten kicked out of diners with me. But yeah, there were a lot of them over the years. There was one in Manhattan, Kansas called Bob's Diner, and the waitresses would kind of abuse you a little bit sometimes. And it's one of the things I really loved about that. There's a certain Kansas waitress, and there's a line in the book that Sid Solving says, as far as I can tell, the waitresses rule Kansas. And I felt like that was true. There's just a certain style of waitress that captures Kansas to me, and it was something that I really missed when I moved to Los Angeles, and there was like an authenticity about it, and just kind of a grit that I really missed, especially not so much in Wichita. Wichita is a little bit glitchier, I think, but a little more upscale. But like from living in Manhattan, Kansas, and getting to explore some of the towns around there. One in particular that I won't call out because it's too small. They'd be mad at me, but yeah.
So kind of touching on that, when you were talking about, one of the things you missed when you left Kansas, you talked a little bit about when you left. In the end of the book, there's this interview, You talked about how you kind of started the idea, like writing this fictional town of Goodnight, Kansas, kind of out of that homesickness. So like, what was that process as? Like, how was that for you to kind of overcome that homesickness?
I think I had been in LA about 5 years. I was living in Hollywood, and I was so homesick. And that was sort of the beginning. I would listen to country music because I missed Kansas, and it made me, it just felt like Kansas to me. And I started writing these stories, and I just created this little town. And I sort of did it unconsciously, like these characters just started to develop. And I would just do it for fun, and at the time I was a reporter for Pacifica Radio, and I felt like my job was just to keep track of everything that was wrong with the world, to know how bad it was, to keep statistics on everything bad that was happening, and to record it and document it and research the context of it, which is even more depressing. And I was like always sort of suicidal over it, like the condition of the world to me was just depressing. And that was in 2005. And we were in the middle of a war, and I just couldn't imagine that things could ever get worse than that. And all day I was like, that was my whole life, was just, I was an activist at the time too, so I would go report on all these bad things, and then at night I would go protest. And sometimes I would cover the actual rallies that I was protesting at. And so I was totally inundated with this. And then around that time I was hired by a guy who wanted to write a website called American Genocide. And he's like, I need you to research everything bad the United States has ever done and document it. And I was like, this is right up my alley. And he paid me to research, and after several years of this, doing this kind of on the side, I was so suicidal. I was just totally depressed. And around that time is when I started writing these stories, and it was just this kind of fictitious fantasy world that I couldn't really go back to Kansas, but so I would just sort of live in this sort of fantasy world. And it wasn't, I didn't intend for it to be a book, or even, they weren't even really stories, they were like more like sketches that I would sort of escape to. And then over the years I just kept writing them, and then I think when I started to write, I wrote another book. It was called Goodnight, Kansas. And it was the world and the characters, but it was really Disco Kennedy's story, and it was about her as a failed country singer. And really, I just, at that time, my kids had just been born. They were like 1 and 2, and I needed, I was like, I gotta find a job, because I'm not pulling my weight around here. These babies, I need to get a real job. And because things were rough, we were kind of financially struggling, and so I was like, well, what can I do? And I looked for jobs with my creative writing degree, and no one was hiring, anyone with a creative writing degree. So I I remember finding the only job that I qualified for was answering phones for Enterprise rental car. They were the only ones that seemed to be hiring someone with my particular skill set in creative writing. And I had to drive 45 minutes to get there, and it wouldn't have covered childcare. So I was like, oh shit, I gotta do something. So I was like, maybe I'll just real quick write a novel. Because I had written another one, but it was about Hollywood communists protesting the war, and I spent 5 years trying to find an agent, and they were like, no. So I was like, I know how to write a novel, so I'll just write real quick, and write a novel. I gave myself, I think, 3 or 4 months, had a schedule, and I wrote this thing, and Disco was from a short story I had written from a class, actually, and the professor had said, I really think you should turn this into a novel. And so I was like, oh right, I'll do that. So I wrote the book about disco, and then I got an agent pretty right away, and we spent 2 years rewriting it. And I was like getting up at 4 in the morning. I was like skeletal from trying to write this book. And then at the end of 2 years, she was like, I think it's just not ready, and I think I gotta let you go because it's been 2 years. And I was just so depressed because I had worked so hard on it, and the problem was though that I had this world, and the agent had said that. She said, you have this amazing world you created, but it doesn't really match the other book that we started with. And so I knew I had this little town and these characters that I was totally in love with, and I mean, Goodnight was so real to me. It had become completely real. And so I kind of went through like Sid Solving's depression, which is really what inspired part of his character. Just that he had failed as a chef, and that was interesting to me too, because I think chefs are a lot like writers, and suicide rates for chefs are very high, and so they are for writers and artists also. And I was really into Anthony Bourdain at the time, and so that was sort of an inspiration too. But yeah, I decided that I was going to try to sort of salvage what was left of this novel by taking all the backstory that was in the way and creating a new thing. And I wasn't sure which character to start with, but I was sick of Disco. I was just so sick of Disco Kennedy, and I felt like she was in my way. So I started playing with the other characters' point of views, and I would write letters to try to find which voice to go to, and then I just couldn't pick one. So I thought, well, I'll just use all of them. I'll just do a multiple POV story, and that's a really long explanation. I could keep going, but I think I should. Next.
Yeah, so if you aren't aware, this book is an epistolary novel, so it's told in emails and chats and journal entries, which is one of my favorite formats of writing. If you've never read an epistolary novel before, this is a great one to start with. Partly because Paige did such a great job of giving every character a very distinct voice, which I think is difficult in this format because you're having to write their actual thoughts and words down on a page. So is it because you were kind of writing these sketches and snippets and letters, or how did you make the transition to this format?
Yeah, that was kind of how it started. Like, I was writing letters between them, just trying to feel their voices and figure out which one would be the right voice to tell the story. And yeah, I had just read 2 epistolaries back to back, not on purpose. I didn't even know what they were. I just randomly picked up a couple books, and they turned out to be epistolary 2 in a row, and I loved them. I love jumping around from different characters, and I have ADHD really bad, so it's better for my reading because I have a hard time reading, and so it's like good to be kind of short and jumping around. And yeah, one of those was that, what's it called? The Guernsey Literary Potato Peel
One of my
Society.
favorite books, yes.
I like that, and I liked that one, it starts out kind of soft, and you think it's this kind of soft story, and then there's dying children in the Holocaust, and you're like, which I appreciate, but yeah, so I had just read those 2, and I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll try to write epistolary, and then what really happened then was I thought, well, I could do a news story. And when I wrote a news story, because I hadn't written news for a while, and I was like, this is fun. Like, and I love community newspapers and like neighborhood newspapers, and I started like looking them up all over, and because of the internet, you can read like the most podunk town in Maryland or like Maine, like all over any other countries, you know, and you can read these little community newspapers, and they have this voice that's so personal. And like, they don't care who's reading it. They're writing to their community and the guy down the street and whoever like lost their, their goat. And I just fell in love with those voices, and you feel kind of like a voyeur a little bit listening to them because they're so personal and so intimate. And like, coming from the world of reporting, which is like not intimate, and like that's what you train as a journalist not to do. You're like trying to get rid of that sort of personal voice and that tone, and trying to take out all the humanity. And so that was a really fun thing to play with the voice of the newspaper, the local newspaper.
And the local newspaper has a mystery editor. No one knows who the editor is. So I thought that was a fun, like, small town touch. And some of my other favorite, just like small town sort of Kansas isms, is there's also a mystery because all the wind chimes are disappearing. And also, when the Solvings move into their grandfather's home, he had alpacas that live in the house with him. So was this just part of your process in creating Goodnight, or did you have specific things you were pulling from?
Well, I love wind chimes, and there's something I associate with Wichita with growing up just because of the wind. And I just always loved them, and I feel like my whole childhood, like if I think about it, I hear not just wind chimes, but lots of them whipping in the wind, and the crazy wind here. And I kind of collect wind chimes too. Like, I really can't get enough of them. But also, like, I just love animals. Like, we've rescued a lot of animals, and we dog sit, and we just have, I would take all the animals, every kind, if I could, and have a dream of living on a farm so I can have, animals. But I just wanted to pick an animal that was kind of funny to me. So alpacas are bizarre. They're just totally weird. And I watched lots of videos of alpacas to try to just get in touch with like the world of alpacas, and because I didn't grow up with any alpacas, and I don't remember seeing one even much in growing up. But yeah, I just wanted to have, like, in my books, I'm so in it when I write it, you know, and so I need like the room to smell good, like I'm in it. And I need there to be animals. And so I was like, what kind of animals do I want to be in the room while I'm in this room, right? You know, because you're writing for years, so like you're in it and like you want animals anyway. So alpacas, they just, but yeah, the research was really fun for that, but yeah.
Good. The alpacas they are main characters. So if I haven't sold you on this book yet, that really should do it. So you kind of talked about the parallels between Sid's depression, your depression, those kind of artistic parallels. So one of the things that Sid had kind of lost after he lost his family business, he kind of lost his creative drive, and one of the ways that manifested for him was he would dream about food, and he kind of lost that. And as he kind of starts getting his mojo back, those food dreams kind of start coming back to him. Is there anything similar for you in your creative process that you kind of associate that with?
Not so much dreams, but one of the things that was interesting to me about writing the food, because I'm like I'm not really a food person at all, and I'm a terrible cook. My family will attest to that, and so food is like very theoretical for me. And I've been a vegetarian, and I have OCD, and I can only eat like certain foods, and like I don't like certain colored foods, and so like when I'm obsessed with watching cooking shows, and when I would watch them, I like would see foods and like normal foods that everyone else has tried, I've never eaten in my life, and I don't even want to look like, I'm just really neurotic about food. And so, but because of that, like I have synesthesia, and so like when I watch cooking shows, like I actually get a taste in my mouth, but it's not the taste of the food. Well, I wouldn't know. It's just like the taste. Like I taste in all the colors. Like when I see colors, I get a taste in my mouth, and sometimes I smell them. And but so like I would watch these cooking shows, and I would get all these tastes in my mouth, and they were really interesting. And one of the things that is funny because my cooking show obsession just started because our cable had gone out. In like, I think it was 2006 or 7, my cable went out, and we could only get one channel, and it was Bravo, and they were playing a marathon of Top Chef for like 2 weeks. Like nothing but Top Chef marathon over and over again. And since we couldn't get anything else on TV, and I was really lonely, and so I would just put the TV on and we'd watch cooking shows. And I think because of my synesthesia, I was like, well, I could taste it, and I thought it was really interesting. And I just became obsessed with watching them after that. And I found them comforting too. Like I think maybe because I was a reporter at the time and was, you know, depressed, like I found it really comforting to watch something where you know no one's gonna die, no one's gonna get murdered, and like you know how it's gonna end, they're gonna eat it. And like, so I found that really comforting. Now I forgot what the question was.
I feel like you answered it. I was asking the parallels between Sid and his kind of loss of his creative drive, and if you had anything similar.
Oh, right. One of the things that I found really interesting, and I stole this from Top Chef, is like they would have exercises where they'd be like, all right, pick the 7 deadly sins, and you have to pick like one deadly sin and create a dish around it. And I was fascinated by that. Like I just thought, or it was so, it was just taking any kind of abstract concept and then trying to represent it in an artistic form, whether it's like writing or art or food. That just totally fascinated me, and I played with that a lot in the book because I tried to think of like what dish, like he does tagliatelle, and I was like, what is tagliatelle? It's a tantrum. It's a tantrum on a plate. Like, and that was really, well, I love noodles. Like noodles are so weird, and there's so many noodles. And like to me, like each one has a kind of I don't know, maybe that's synesthesia actually, but it seems like they each have a personality and like a certain emotion attached. But like at one point, like one of the critics says, your food was an oath of silence on a plate. And that was really fun, like playing with like different ideas of like what would that taste like what ingredients, what foods would be an oath of silence on a plate. And another dish, he called it an American scream. And I was like, what is an American scream in a dish? So that was just something that was very, like, I guess this is the kind of theoretical things people who don't eat actual food write about. So,
well, the food writing is very descriptive. You will be very hungry. Sid creates a tamosa, which is like a samosa but tomato based, and I want one. Like I think about that, I'm like, that just sounds like the best thing ever. So really,
I wanted to do like recipes. I actually tried to talk my mother and my husband into creating a tamosa, and like I wanted to like have like recipes in the book, but then nobody else really wanted to do it. And I'm not a good enough cook to actually pull it off. But yeah, I would like to try one of those too. I had to do a lot of research since it is so theoretical, because I don't know anything about food, so I did a ton of research on chefs. I just watched a lot of videos too, and like I had to know like what squid ink tasted like. I'm like, I'm not tasting squid ink. Like I won't eat normal food, I'm certainly not gonna eat squid ink. So I like Googled, what does squid ink taste like? And that's a weird thing to Google. But there were videos of people eating squid ink and then responding, because thank God for YouTube. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna just take their word for it.
Yeah, no, the food writing is great. You would never know that you were
That I
not
don't
really
eat
a foodie,
anything.
so I love that. So this is very much a comfort read. It feels like a warm hug, but there are some harder themes in this book as well. Goodnight is a very small, struggling town, as in a lot of rural towns now. There's kind of the flight of the younger generations. There's really only one employer in town, this tire company. And so there's a lot of, there's this underlying sense of what's gonna happen, are we all gonna be okay? How much of that was because you wanted to kind of bring in the real life things you were writing about and researching?
A lot of it just kind of leaked in, because it was like this escape story I was writing, and I was writing so many political things in my real life. I didn't intend for that to leak in, but it just did. And like one of the things I talk about is, I did a lot of like supportive labor strikes in LA. I was really involved in supporting the labor movement. And there was a UFCW strike in Los Angeles in 2003, 2004, and I was doing strike support, and it was the first time that I had ever seen a union like really up close and seen the work that they did. And it was a long strike, and those workers did not make a lot of money. And in Los Angeles, it was, money goes a lot less far. And to watch the struggles they went to, and to see the labor leaders and how much, seeing the circles under their eyes. I just remember seeing these like labor leaders who were like exhausted, and they were fighting so hard. And we would go and I organized a food drive for them. And I remember it was an activist group, and we were doing meetings to figure out how do we support the striking workers. And there were all these lawyers that were doing pretty well, and they were like, well, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do this media thing. And I was like, we need to feed these people. They've been on strike for 5 months. The end is not in sight, and they need food. And so I organized, and one of the lawyers, I was so mad at him. He was like, that's stupid. Like, that's not gonna look, like, that's not shiny or whatever. And I'm like, and it really made me mad, but I never forgot it. And I thought, well, that's the difference between someone who went to law school on his parents' money and someone who has experienced food insecurity in their life. And I know what it's like to live on minimum wage, and it does not cover, like, I remember working, especially when I lived in Manhattan, Kansas, and that was a huge influence, and because it was so hard, and living on minimum wage, and my job was an hour walk, and there was no bus because they just didn't have a bus, so I had to walk an hour to work, and I couldn't afford food. And once you paid for rent and electricity and all that stuff, there was like no more money. That was it. There was no money for food. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, that I was always depressed and kind of crazy. And it was because I didn't eat, because I couldn't afford to. And the shame, the shame of like, of feeling like, what am I doing wrong? Like, why can't I do this? Like, there's such an internalized shame around poverty and around that kind of food insecurity. And I remember someone from my AA meeting was like, oh, there's a church that gives out free food, and you just have to go there. And so I didn't have a car, so I had to like walk there. And I actually gave this little scenario to someone in the book, and it was very cathartic and healing to like, it feels really good when you've had these like moments in your life of struggle, and then you find a character to give it to. And it gets represented because I think that those struggles, especially class struggles, are such invisible moments, and you don't really, people don't know what you're going through because you don't want them to know because you're sure it's your fault. And I remember walking to this church to get food, and then I got there and I was a vegetarian, and of course I don't eat anything, and so these really nice ladies are handing me like condensed milk and like cooking stuff, and I also didn't have pots or pans or anything like that, and so I was like, but I was too ashamed to like say, and also like I didn't want them to think I was being ungrateful. But they just started handing me all these weird foods that I either didn't eat, couldn't eat, or didn't know what it was, or that required like dishes. And then as I was walking home, there were a few things I could eat, like there was some bread in there. And I was walking home, and the bags broke, and it had just rained, and it was like the dirty, like that Kansas gutter rain muck that was happening, and like all this stuff just fell into the gutter, and the cars are just going by, and I just thought like, fuck, this sucks, you know? And anyway, so that's a moment I gave to Raina Freeman, and I really, I feel like the class struggle in this country, and it's only getting worse, is something that we don't talk enough about, and the rhetoric of American capitalism is so shaming, and that idea of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, and there's a line in there that I've always had in my head, and I was like, what can I do with the line? And that's like, how do you pull yourself up by your bootstraps if you don't have any boots? And like in, you know, whatever your boots are, there's so many ways that like when you're in that kind of financial situation, like one little thing, it's like a domino effect. If anything goes wrong, the car breaks or whatever, do you actually have a car? Or just everything is such a house of cards that it just, you know, it's like one little thing and your whole life falls apart. Healthcare, the cost of healthcare. I forgot what the question was again. Sorry.
You're good. We were just talking about your life, writing about
right.
the injustices of the world, and the people in this town that are very poor, struggling with health, struggling with, you know, not having a car, because there's a food pantry, and a character does say, well, we can't get there. You know, we live an hour outside of town. What are we supposed to do?
Yeah, and there were other things too, like, it's funny, it's the way that things sort of subconsciously slip into your work. And my sister had been living in Lawton, Oklahoma, and there's a tire factory there, it's Goodyear. And like when I was writing this story, I was like, oh, a tire factory. I'll just put a tire factory in there, because there should be some factory. And then that was, I can't do spoilers, so I'll just say there's a whole drama with the tire factory. But yeah, I can't say anything.
It's tricky.
Too many spoilers. Okay.
You just have to read it and find it. But yeah, there's a lot of, like I said, there's these deeper themes that when you start the book, it feels like it's going to be this very kind of fluffy, this family moves to Kansas and they're going to save the town. But there's this element of the town saving them as well.
Yeah. I think there's something, and it's like epidemic. I was talking to my friend, my old teacher, Tracy, yesterday about this epidemic of loneliness, and like how people are desperate for community, and a lot of the political acrimony that's happening is because of that, because we really need community, and when we don't have it, I think the internet, it becomes we latch onto the internet, and then, you know, there's so many crazy rabbit holes that can create division and tribalism, and so yeah, that's something that I think they were hungry for and maybe didn't know it, but that's just something that I didn't really consciously put in there too. It just kind of leaked in, because I've had a lot of moments in my life where I felt like that. I kind of have trouble staying in one place, so I tend to have found myself in new cities, starting over again, and it's really hard to find community in those places, and so it's very much about finding your place, and then some of that also is just how failure can lead us to places that we would never have gone, that end up being better than the places we would have gone if we had gotten what we wanted, which has always been a theme of my life. Like, everything good that's happened to me was because of some mistake or some wrong turn, or something else didn't work out, or, you know, or just unexpected. Yeah.
So read the book. It feels like a warm hug. It feels like something we need right now with the world that we're living in, the loneliness epidemic. I think one of the main themes is really, if someone starts off the chain of helping someone else, reaching out, it's gonna continue. You know, someone else will say, oh, well then I now have a little bit more of the ability and the spoons to reach out to this next person, and it creates this domino effect.
Yeah, I talk about in the book Stone Soup, the children's story. You guys know Stone Soup? It's always been one of my very favorite books of all time. And it's funny because they say you could tell a lot about a person by what their first favorite book was, and that was one of mine. And I love that idea of sort of tricking people into helping other people. And but it is contagious, and we need that. We really need that right now, especially I think when you think about the problems of our country, the problems of the world, they seem so big. And they're big, but like the solutions, they have to be small. Like when you can't control something on a national level or a world level, all you can do is just kind of do the next right thing and find some small way. And if you can't affect like a national outcome, you can affect a local outcome, you know, and we have to. But also I think like being aware of like people in our community who need us. And yeah, because it's so hard to ask for help when you need it. And yeah, one of the influences is I'm a huge fan of It's a Wonderful Life. And in fact, I was worried a little bit that the book would be too sentimental, because I didn't intend for it to be like this like feel good happy book. It just kind of went that way, and so I went with it. But I had read about how Frank Capra, the writer and director of It's a Wonderful Life, that he was criticized when the book or the movie first came out for being so too sentimental, and it kind of flopped at the box office actually, and then it just all of a sudden became this beloved movie, and then of course he was accused of being a communist because of all the communist themes in the movie, which I felt like that gave me permission to, like, it balances the sentimentality. I'm like, there's plenty of communism too.
Yes, communism, alpacas, wind chime thieves, you know, it's got everything. Well, I want to open up the floor for just a few minutes if anyone has any questions to ask Paige about the book. Start here.
So the process of getting a book published, we've had a few authors visit with us about that. What was your process of finally finding someone to publish your book?
Yeah, it's funny, like I said, I spent 5 years trying to get my first book published, but you know, it was called After the Revolution, We'll All Wear Tiaras, and it was pretty radical, I guess. But then my second book, like I said, it was 2 years, and then they cut me loose. And then this book, it was amazing because the other two books I sent out to like 20,000, like all the agents, basically, all of them. And then this one I only sent it out to about 5 agents. And then one of the agents right away said that they wanted to read it and asked for exclusivity, so I wasn't allowed to send it to anyone else. So, but it took them like 9 months. They kind of sat on it for 9 months, and at the end they were like, yeah, we're gonna pass. And I was like, by then I had lost all momentum, but also by then I had gotten accepted to graduate school, and January 6th had just happened, and graduate school was in Canada, so I was like, I'm just gonna forget about that book, and I'm just gonna go to Canada. Hang out in Canada for a while, go to get my MFA. And then while I was getting my MFA, after I'd completely forgotten the book, I barely was aware that it was weird, I just wrote it and kind of left it. And I got this email from an agent, and she was like, I was the intern for the agent who read your book and passed on it, and she said, I swore to myself if I ever became a real agent that I would look you up and see if you had anyone. And she's like, are you doing anything? Like, do you have an agent? And I was like, you know, no, not really seeing anyone right now. So yeah, she was like, well, I'm not gonna make promises, but I'll read it again. And she read it again. It was like, then it happened really fast. Like, yeah, then it happened really fast. She was signing me, and that kind of sucked though, because I was trying to write my thesis, and I was in graduate school, and like graduate school is really hard. It's like really hard, and I had like 2 kids, and to raise and trying to go to graduate school, and then also rewrite a novel at the same time. So that was weird, but that made it a completely different experience, that I was sort of running two finish lines at the exact same time. And in fact, my agent, when she had me do my first rewrite, no, it's my last rewrite, she picked a date that it just happened to be 3 days before my thesis deadline for graduate school. She's like, how about this date? And being a Kansan, I was like, sure, I can do that. Of course I can do that, no problem. And she's like, okay, great. And then I, suffered. Suffered. It was painful, but I did get them in on time. And then the publisher, I was really happy. It was a Midwestern publisher, Source Books, that picked it up, and it's been a really good experience. Did that answer your question? Thank you.
Melissa?
So I read it and loved it. It was really fun. So first off, I just have to say you did a really good job of doing so I grew up in a very small town, and that feeling when you have somebody write about your experience and you're like, only I'm allowed to say bad things or whatever, and I felt like you did a phenomenal job in adding the sweet parts, but also the very real crusty parts. And I just, it was really funny. So you were talking about how you didn't like, or you had kind of gotten away from Disco's character for a while, and you were kind of over that. So along with those crusty characters, you have a really good one in here with that Virginia Easton and her things. I thought she was hilarious, but it was also very accurate. And I've heard the exact same things in maybe not all in one person, but so just out of curiosity, did you really have a lot of fun writing her, or did you have any other characters that ended up being like ones that you really loved in this book?
She was fun because growing up in Kansas, you have like that character that's the kind of judgy, very starchy, like shirt's very iron, like big shiny cross, but not too big. A lot of white, and I just have been getting in those people's way my whole childhood and getting the what for that. So yeah, it's always been like, it's sort of a composite of many women that I've known over the years, and I think also like, growing up in such a Christian place where I wasn't a Christian, and so I was a target for some very well-intentioned people who, and actually this book is very much like, I think, an apology to all the churches that tried so hard. And they, because my friends were always taking me to church, but there was always like these like stiff, angry women in the corner who you could just feel the judgment across the room, and they could be pretty destructive, but I really didn't want her to be one-dimensional, and so that was kind of fun, trying to get into her head, to try to ask myself, like, how do I not create this like stereotype, even though for me, like, she kind of is a stereotype. She's this villain that's followed me in my childhood, and I realized, so I was like, okay, well, what makes this mean woman tick? And I thought, well, she thinks things should be the way they are. And, but I'm like in my late 40s, and I think things should be a certain way, and like the young, like I'm getting to that age where I'm like, what the hell? Like, they shouldn't be doing this, and TikTok, everything's fast, everything's so fast, and I'm like, everything gets on, I'm like, my daughters always throw out her phone, and look at this, and it's like fast TikTok movement, and I'm like, yeah. So I've gotten to this point in my life where, like, I think things could be the way they used to be a little bit, and a lot, and yeah, like I miss newspapers, like stuff like that, like just little things that I see getting lost with age, and some of it's very good, you know, and then some of it is horrible, like some of the things that are being lost, and the sense of dignity and like that I kind of miss, and just so many little things like day to day that I miss, and so that was a way that I kind of got into her character, because I was like, oh, well, she just wants it to be the way it was when she grew up, and but that was real fun, because then I was like, women should be women, and men should hold doors, and dogs shouldn't be allowed in stores, and so yeah, she was kind of fun, but like I try not to make any characters, that's not true. So there's some evil characters, like that was fun too, like I had an evil landlord that was just, well, I've had many evil landlords actually, and like no heat, like below 0 record cold, no heat, won't return phone calls, had to move in with a friend because I just didn't have heat, you know, stuff like that. So I got to create the evil landlord and seek my revenge that way, and you know, evil bosses, stuff like that. But Disco really was, I think, my overall favorite character, just because I think I was such a wingnut growing up. I was such a weirdo, and a lot of people in this room could attest to that. And so it was fun to kind of create this character and reconcile some of the sense of just being, always feeling like I didn't belong. And yeah, so I really love her for that, and I loved giving her a sense of community. And I mean, now I look back and I realize like, oh, I didn't belong. I was just the weirdo in the room. Like there's always one or two, usually one. I was just the weirdo in the room. But yeah, so she was probably my favorite character to write. Actually, I have a bunch, but she's my favorite. Yeah. Oh, any more?
Good. We've got time for one more, and I think there was a question in the back. Did I see a hand raise? If not, someone raise a hand and ask a question. Yeah.
Hi, Dave. It's Steve Heller.
Ah, Steve.
Before I ask my question, I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be here with the book launch, and I'm proud of you, and I'm really happy for you. And my question is a simple one that might be hard to answer. How do you keep going? How do you find the energy and the discipline to go to the page every day and get it done and be a wife, be a mother, do all the other things you have to do in your life?
I love that question. I'm so glad you're here. Give her a round of applause. I don't. How do you keep going? How do you find the discipline, I think, and the motivation to keep going?
Yes.
And I mean, I definitely go through phases, but I always have like multiple projects going. So when one I lose steam with it, I switch to another one. But I started to realize at some point that I was just always going to be writing something, and whether it ever went anywhere, I just like kind of have to write all the time. But my magic trick is that I get up at 4:50 in the morning. Well, actually, I set my alarm for 4:50, and then I get up at 5. Gotta be like honest about that. But because I feel guilty that I get up at 4:50, I'm like, I mean to get up at 4:50, but I get up at 5. And if I get up at 5:10, I'm mad at myself. But there's something magical for me that happens there, and I really, really believe like in like sort of channeling. Like I think that there's a sort of consciousness that's like the writer consciousness, and you can just tap into it. And I feel like anyone probably can. And I think the more you tap into it, the more open that channel becomes, and like then it's just a matter of like kind of getting out of the way. And the thing I like about doing it in the morning is that my brain's not awake yet, and so when I sit down, like I'll just find myself writing something. And I didn't start doing that because I had discipline though. I started because my kids were 1 and 2, and I realized that I would never write again if I didn't get up. They got up at 7, so I was like, well, I guess I'll get up at 5, and then I can get 2 hours of writing time. Sometimes they wake up at 6, and then I'd want to kill myself. I'd be like, no, I've got another hour. But I think also just like that, I just love language too. Like I love words, and I would just sit and I have just sat and write written words. Like I'll be like V, and I'll just start writing V words. So for me, like I just love language and I love words, and so so that's part of it too. And I would like to say that Steve was, this is like, I have so many teachers here, like, it's just like, I'm like overwhelmed by it, and like, I was, where is she? Tracy Archibald. She was my English teacher, and my, I would not have graduated from high school without her, and she tricked me into going to college. At the time, I was real broke, and she was like, oh, here's a writing contest, and I would win like $50 here, and like $75 here, and then one day she's like, here's one for $500, and I was like, oh. I was like, 18, I'm like, $500? She's like, yeah, just give me some poetry, and she's like, okay, let's mail it off, and then I won, and it was the Fine Arts Achievement Award scholarship. It was a scholarship to Kansas State University, and Steve Heller was the head of the creative writing department who judged the contest. Do you remember this? He judged the contest that got me into Kansas State University, and I wasn't planning on going. Like I had two plans. My first plan was to move to India to join an ashram to be of service. I was like very excited having a spiritual awakening in high school. And actually I worked here at that time, and it was when it was Gessler's drug, and I had like shaved my head because I was going to move to India and be a monk. And Bob Gessler, who was the drugstore owner here, was like so confused. And he was like, I don't know what to do. Like, I feel like maybe I should fire you. He's like, I've never been in this. No one's ever just shaved their head before. And I was like, but it's because of God. I'm like practicing humility. I'm giving up my ego. And so that was my mental condition when my high school graduation plan was to move to India. And my fallback plan was, well, I'll go be a homeless poet in San Francisco. That was my fallback plan. So I had no intention of going to college. So when this like scholarship came, I was like, what am I going to do with that? And I thought if I ever did go to college, of course it would be in New York City or Berkeley. And then it was like, man, wait, I'm going to move somewhere smaller than Wichita, somewhere more hillbilly than Wichita. And so, but I went to K-State, and yeah. So, and then my art teacher, Yvonne, was there too. And they like, I had just gotten sober at like 17, and they like, I was a mess. And so, yeah, I'm really glad. And my old 8th grade teacher was here. I don't know if she's still here. Jan, I think she had to leave early. But yeah, my 8th grade teachers were here. Like, love teachers! And I wouldn't be here, and certainly I wouldn't have been able to write these books. I mean, honestly, I just wouldn't be alive without those support, because I was, I needed a little extra help. Not just to go to college, just to live, like, I think writers do, I think artists do. I mean, right now, I think we all need a little extra help, like, these are just a little intense. But yeah, I'm just really grateful that, so many people came down, old teachers. Thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you all so much for coming out to support Paige. Thank you so much for letting us host your release party. This was so great, and let's all give Paige another round of applause. We're going to form a line over here on this side in this aisle. We do still have some copies left, so grab yours and Paige will sign for you. We'll see you up here.